This is something we heard about and reported on, which is I was told by a few people that Ed Miliband's nickname is Ed Milliwatt, and this has been uttered by some members of the administration. And it obviously relates to his old brief when he was energy secretary. But that is also the brief where lots of the concerns began. So you look at the US ambassador to the UK, Warren Stevens, and he has said on the record that he hasn't agreed with Ed Miliband on energy. You look at where Donald Trump has had the strongest opinions on Andy Burnham as Prime Minister and praising him for an announcement that is yet to come on oil and gas licenses.
And Katy Balls, the Washington editor for The Times, joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what kind of reception can Ed Miliband expect?
So I think it's fair to say there's a certain level of skepticism within the Trump administration towards Ed Miliband. I would probably caveat that with, I've had a few people tell me, for all the furore, and we've had various briefings that, Trump figures don't think much of Ed Miliband. I don't think the man himself, the US president, really knows who Ed Miliband is. Now, perhaps if someone were to say to Donald Trump, here's some things Ed Miliband has said about you in the past, and dig at those comments and have an opinion. But all I mean is, this isn't coming from the president. However, what we have seen, and one of the things the Times reported early on when there was lots of speculation about who would be in Andy Burnham's government, were Trump officials raising concerns about Ed Miliband being appointed chancellor. That relates directly to Ed Miliband's energy policies, and a sense that this was expressed to Labour figures that the US would think this was a mistake. Now, many listening will say, well, is it up to the US who is in government? Of course not. But there was clearly a concern because they link things like high energy costs, the current energy policy, with various things like not being able to fund defense in the way they want. And I think there was also some trepidation about the idea Ed Miliband might become foreign secretary. I think chancellor would have been a bigger issue for the Trump administration, but I think it does mean that the jury is slightly out. And of course, as Ed Miliband arrives in Washington, I think he's going to be hoping to prove the naysayers wrong.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, it's not like he's got lots of name recognition, but he has been given a nickname, I think, by some in the administration, Ed Milliwatt.
Yes, this is something we heard about and reported on, which is I was told by a few people that Ed Miliband's nickname is Ed Milliwatt, and this has been uttered by some members of the administration. And it obviously relates to his old brief when he was energy secretary. But that is also the brief where lots of the concerns began. So you look at the US ambassador to the UK, Warren Stevens, and he has said on the record that he hasn't agreed with Ed Miliband on energy. You look at where Donald Trump has had the strongest opinions on Andy Burnham as Prime Minister and praising him for an announcement that is yet to come on oil and gas licenses. But it does speak to the big complaint you often hear from the Trump administration, and you often hear, they don't like the UK and freedom of speech. They don't like all these things. But the consistent argument is effectively that they think that you need to have low energy costs to power lots of things and to have a strong economy. And they see Ed Miliband specifically as blocking that. So this Milliwatt nickname that we heard about is obviously making, if not it particularly needs explained, but it's making light of the fact, how much energy his policies generate. And that is a term for him that's been used in DC.
So he has been invited by Marco Rubio. They have met before, so it's the second time they're meeting. Do we know what they are likely to be talking about and what the relationship between the pair is likely to be?
So we know that there are certain things that Ed Miliband will be representing the UK on, and those will be issues. So Ukraine will be one of those. I think Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, and the fact that you've had Pete Hegseth to his new counterpart, Wes Streeting, talk about the UK potentially hosting a conference, a summit of some type. I think that will be a conversation. And then I think the UK side would quite like to talk about Palestine, Gaza, and their hopes there. But I think that's one of the conversations where the US doesn't really see the UK so much as an active player than perhaps the previous two. And I think in all these conversations, it is the US approach is really, what can the UK bring to the table to show it should be in these conversations? They don't always have the presumption or the assumption that the UK should be a part of these conversations. So that's
Yeah.
perhaps a challenge for Ed Miliband. And then I think in terms of potential clashes, for example, we know that Marco Rubio has recently started a campaign against the ICC, the International Criminal Court. He's talking about how he wants to
Mm.
disband it. That's a institution that Ed Miliband has praised in the past, and as far as we know, this Labour government quite likes these kind of global institutions. So there is perhaps ways that they could go, off script. But I think all the indications so far is that Ed Miliband is trying to find common ground at the moment with the Trump administration, almost trying to prove people wrong that, he has very little in common, then will struggle.
Just finally, Katie, Ed Miliband is seen by some as a bit of a joke, but by others as quite a good and deft politician. Do you think he will be able to make the most of that role as Foreign Secretary? Because it can be a really influential position in a government. And I think it's fair to say that, there have been a number of Foreign Secretaries over the last couple of years, and it may have been difficult for allies to get a real read of where the UK is. Ed Miliband is a man who is often very clear about what he believes and can be pretty effective.
Yes, and I think he's been really impactful. Like, as you allude to, whether or not you like Ed Miliband or what he stands for, if you look at the direction the Labour Party's been moving in, if you look at the cabinet under Keir Starmer, people across the divide will say Ed Miliband has been one of the most effective members of the cabinet. And there's also, I think, been talk in recent years that the foreign secretary role is not really what it used to be. It's perhaps where you put
Mm.
pesky politicians because they're perhaps causing problems domestically, or you think they're a threat to you, you want to send them away, or you just think, oh, that's a bit, but they'll feel very important and they can do some things, but there's a limit to it, because lots of the big foreign policy decisions really end up being made in 10 Downing Street. But I think the counter to that is I don't think Ed Miliband is the type of politician who is going to take a role like this and not want to make a mark. I think the question is, what type of mark does he want to make? And he obviously set out his initial aims when he was appointed to the role. And on paper, they are not very Trump world. But I don't think anyone thinks Ed Miliband is very Trump world, if we're being honest. Nor perhaps does he want to be, if you look at the things he in the past he has said on Donald Trump. But, things like international law, climate diplomacy, talking about international aid. So I think that while his visit in Washington, D.C. is a really important test, is not necessarily where the most kind of important legacy work he would want to do as foreign secretary is going to be. But the DC issue is effectively, as we've seen from past, leaders, and whether it's conservative governments in Trump's first term or Keir Starmer in the second term, America has the potential to dominate and derail your plans. And therefore, you need a strategy and a way to work with them. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing. Does Ed Miliband have a plan for in the coming days?
That's really interesting, Katie. Thank you very much.